Good afternoon today. It's actually not morning, but it is still the 90-day home buyer challenge with yours truly, Cecilia Marlowe of the Federal Savings Bank. And today we have an amazing guest with us. I am so excited about our guests all the time because they just bring such a wealth of information and knowledge to the table for you to help you to navigate the home buying process. Of course, as professionals, most of the individuals that are here with us and that have joined us on our challenge have been doing this for a while. And so, what we call easy peasy, we know that you guys are typically up working or not working, but Googling late at night to try to find the answer. And so what we want to do is try to help you avoid that and really give you some personal expertise and help as you are on this process and on this journey. So I am super excited. It is week 8. Week 8. You guys have been doing a really, really fantastic job with your homework. So we started this journey back in December. And we started off with talking about goal setting. We started talking about how do you know if you're even ready to buy a home. That was really our focus around week 1 and really wrapping our head around, am I even ready to buy a home? And if I think I'm ready, what do I need to do? And that moved us right into week 2, which was all about money management, budgeting basics. And so I know that there was some resistance around creating that first budget, but you guys are pros at it now because it is now February. It is actually the middle of February. I can't believe it. Week 3, we talked about understanding credit. Week 4, we extended that conversation to talk about avoiding credit traps. And we had the wonderful Miss Jerry Tolliver with us. And she gave us some really awesome tips. So I'm going to remind you guys to go back to the YouTube page and to take a look at some of those videos as it relates to credit, because that seems to be one of the places where we first begin to get stuck. Week number 5 was all about getting your paperwork and your financial documents in order. So yes, the W-2s, the tax returns, the pay stubs, the bank statements. And we really went into depth around what the bank is looking for and beginning to think like an underwriter when you're submitting those documents for your actual loan application itself. Week 6, we talked about the underwriter's perspective. And so the underwriter is not, the guy behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz. It's a young lady or a young man who's just like you, but they never meet you. And so what we want to do on paper is give them a really clear explanation and understanding around, who you are and why you're credit worthy. And most importantly, we want to know that we're going to get our money back once we give it to you. So that brought us through week 6. Week 7, we dived into some loan programs. So understanding FHA, VA, conventional programs. We touched very lightly on 203K rehab loans, so the ability to be able to get purchase money in addition to money to rehab a property if that's something that you're interested in. And then we talked a little bit about down payment and closing costs. So we are at the part of the process now where we actually get to go and talk to the real estate broker. Let me just tell you guys, the professional real estate brokers are not going to want to take you to 100,000 houses before you have your pre-approval in hand, which is actually why we talked so heavy on the front end of this about getting yourself together as it relates to credit and finances and having your approval ready and solid. Because after all, who wants to go shopping and they don't know how much money they have in the bank? Okay, and so you are probably not a very fun partner to shop with if we don't know how much money you have in the bank. So today we have Miss Sanina Ellison-Jones, who is the managing broker of Chicago Homes Realty Group. She manages a team. She is also a property manager. And today she's going to be talking with us about why you actually need a real estate broker inside of your home purchase process. And we're also going to be discussing today understanding your wants versus your needs. And so that's a really, really great conversation for us to have, because as you get out there and you start shopping for a home, you really want to be able to kind of narrow down. Like, you might not know the exact home, but we want to make sure that you have an idea of what it is that you're looking for, so that the home that you really want isn't gone before you get to it. So welcome to our home buyer class and our home buyer challenge, Miss Sanina Ellison Jones.
Hello. Good morning. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you for being here today. We are so appreciative of your time. And so I want to jump right in, and I want to talk about, what our goals are for today. And so today we are going to help buyers to understand the difference between a buyer's agent and a listing agent, why buyers actually need an agent to represent them, the value that you as the real estate broker bring to the table to represent them as the home buyer's agent. And then we're going to talk briefly about just some questions that, buyers should be asking an agent when they're thinking about adding them to their team. And finally, we are going to discuss wants versus needs and really setting some realistic expectations. So before we jump in, is there anything that you would like to share with the group? Of course, we're going to make sure that they get all of your good contact information at the end. But do you want to tell us a little bit about, how long you've been in the business, what has you to be in the business, how you got started, anything fun like that?
Sure. So again, I'll just introduce myself. And before I do that, thank you again, Cecilia, for having me on the video today. I'm excited to be here and share the information. My name is Sanina Ellison Jones. I've been doing real estate now for about 15 years. And I started in this business after reading the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It got me really excited about real estate. And not only did I want to, initially I started out wanting to own real estate. And so without a whole lot of knowledge, being a buyer myself at the time, a first-time buyer, I went out and I saw an $800,000 property. Without consulting a loan officer, without consulting a real estate agent even. I just saw a property online. I scheduled a showing, and oddly enough, they allowed me to see the property. I wish I had the revenue at that time, even now, to purchase an $800,000 property, but I didn't. But what I found in that experience was that's certainly not how this industry should work. I wasted a lot of time, not only my own time, but also the agent's time with that person scheduling the showing up there. And I just was ill prepared. And so it forced me to take a step back and really learn the industry. And I kind of started to fall in love with real estate from that point, and fast forward to today. And I've been doing this now for 15 years. So that's kind of how I got started. And now I've just fallen in love with the industry. And as managing broker, I've developed a passion for helping other real estate brokers reach their goals, and to shape and coach and mold them to reach their goals in real estate.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That is a wonderful story. And I love the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I almost feel like that's one of those books that you can continue to read, and each time you read it, you get something new. Like there's a
Absolutely.
So we're going to start our conversation off today, because I think that buyers should understand that there's a distinct difference between a listing agent and a buyer's agent. Oftentimes I have gotten a call from a buyer who I may have pre-approved. They may even have an agent that they're working with at the time, but they'll call me and say, hey, I saw this property, I called the number, and I went to go see it. And I'm like, hey, I think we got to back up and rewind a little bit. Tell me what was your thought process behind that? And so I want you to help them to distinguish the difference between a listing agent and then the buyer's agent.
Sure. So one of the things that I do before I take a buyer out, I often get calls from buyers that are interested, or potential buyers that are interested in purchasing real estate. And I love to sit down and have a conversation with the buyer. I call it a buyer consultation, so we can learn more, so I can learn more about what it is that you're looking for. But most importantly, where are you in this process? I get people at all different stages of the home buying process, and everyone wants to go and look at the houses, and that's the fun part. And I call that the shiny thing, right? And so that's the part where you're determining the home that's best fit for you. But before we do that, I want to take a step back, and I like to sit down with the buyer and help them understand there's two sides to every transaction when it pertains to real estate. So you have the listing agent who you probably call to schedule that showing, but you want to beware. In our industry, there's a term called buyer beware. You want to be aware that the listing agent, their fiduciary responsibility is to the seller. So their job is to ensure that they've baked the cookies, they have the property smelling good and looking good and cleaned up, and the windows are all shined and the seal is all polished. That's their job, is to present the property in its best light to a potential buyer. However, there's also the other side of the transaction, which is the buyer's agent who represents the buyer. So you don't want to go to court. I always use the analogy of going to court. You want to make sure that there's a prosecuting attorney and there's a defense attorney. You want to make sure that whichever side of the fence you're on, you have the right representation, right? And so as a buyer's agent, the buyer's agent's job is to represent the buyer and to be a fiduciary to the buyer. Their job will be to research properties in the area for you. The listing agent is not going to provide you with a CMA or a comparative market analysis to show you what other properties have sold for. They want you to pay this price, and they're going to try and justify why you should pay this price. The buyer's agent, however, is going to provide you with a comparative market analysis of what similar homes have sold for recently. That way you can see that, well, yes, that is a fair market price, or actually that price is really low. You're getting equity in your home, or that price is really high. We think you should come in a little bit lower. And so the suggestions that the buyer's agent is going to offer as invaluable information, I call it advice, is because they can advise you on and steer you away from making bad decisions.
I love it. That was perfect. And so in a nutshell, what you just said is that the seller's agent is really out there to protect the seller, and then the buyer's agent is to make sure that that buyer's interests are protected. So I love it.
Exactly.
I wanted to throw this out there and just kind of get your feel for, the buyers that you've worked with. I found this on the National Association of Realtors website, and it was a snapshot of, a home buyer today in our market. And so it said 34% of home buyers are currently first-time home buyers. And this was as of about 2017. The average purchase price, and this is a nationwide picture, about $235,000. Average household income about $88,000. Now I don't know about this in Chicago. Could be true. 84% bought a home in a suburban area. 10% was the average down payment. 83% purchased single family homes. And this is the good news. 87%, when this research was done, did use an actual real estate agent. I wanted to dispel a couple of myths as it relates to the types of properties. And so here's what I'm going to ask you. Does one type of agent better service, someone who's looking for condos versus someone who's looking for multi-units versus someone who's looking for single family homes? What would your take on that be?
To me, it's all about experience.
Okay.
One agent can certainly service all areas. I certainly service a multitude of property types. But you want to make sure that the agent, just like the lender that you're working with, is well versed in that type of property, because everyone does not have knowledge and experience with working with condos. They may not be familiar with, FHA versus conventional, and why this condo association is not approved and what it would take for it to become approved. Sometimes that's a process that can be completed during the duration of that purchase if the right steps are taken. And so it's really about experience. And so I would suggest, and most agents don't want to reveal their inexperience level, and you don't often find that out until it's too late.
Yeah.
But having an honest conversation about the type of property that you're interested in, and quite frankly, most buyers don't know exactly the type of property that they're looking for either. A lot of times they are interested in 2 bedrooms, 2 baths. So if it ends up being a condo because that one was cheaper, usually people need a single family for reasons that are very specific. So I would just make sure that the agent that you're working with, you know, is well versed in the type of property, particularly if you're looking at something outside of a condo and a single family, like a multi-unit. You want someone that has the experience in working with multi-unit property.
Wonderful. And so, you know, we've kind of already covered, you know, just that fiduciary responsibility that the buyer's agent brings to the table. I want to share with buyers. Now, I know that each real estate broker agent works a little bit differently. And so as it relates to fees that a buyer would incur as they are about to go out. So you have a buyer, they're pre-approved. You've had the buyer consultation with them. Are there any fees that the buyer is paying directly to you as the real estate broker that's going to help them find their home?
The good thing about working with a buyer's agent is the buyer's agent does not charge the buyer a fee. The services that we provide, we are paid on the back end of the transaction. So the good thing is we're just as incented to get this transaction to close as you are to purchase it. But you want to make sure that you work with someone who absolutely has your best interest at heart. Because at the end of the day, like I tell most buyers, you know, I'm not biased on you purchasing this house versus that house versus the third home. My goal is to make sure that you make an informed decision, and my goal is to provide you with all the information and the tools that you need to make that decision.
Perfect. And then some buyers are asking, they may call, you know, and as we're having a conversation about the pre-approval process, I've had, you know, buyers to say, hey, do you know about properties that haven't hit the market yet? Can you talk or speak a little bit to that and give some type of professional opinion?
Always professional.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, sure. So in our industry, we do come across properties that have yet hit the market, especially if you're a listing broker. Before a property hits the market, a good listing broker will pre-market the listing. That is one of our goals, is to get the exposure, as much exposure as we can for a property to our sphere of influence, being our industry partners, our colleagues, other real estate professionals and their clients. And so it's important to work with an agent who has a great network. Pre-marketing properties is totally fine in our market, and it may position you as a buyer to acquire a property at a lower price than before it hits the market, because at that point now the demand may drive up the price. A lot of my investors, they're always looking for off-market listings. And being that we do a lot of listings, we do get to, you know, market those, pre-market those to our sphere, to our network of potential buyers. So I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think that it puts the buyer in an advantage. You may not see that as common because the seller wants to get that property on the market as quickly as possible. They want to get as many eyes on it. Why? Because the seller wants the price to be driven up. They want to get as much as they can for it. But again, by positioning it properly, they also don't want it to sit in the market for a very long time, right? And so as many eyes as we can get on the property, as much interest as we can drum up for it, by the time it does hit the market, the hope is that it can sell quickly.
Awesome. Very good. Thank you for sharing that, because I was not sure if that was taboo. So I just learned something too. Because I get that all the time. So there are no costs for the buyer to work with you. You do have pre-market listings from time to time, so you know about properties typically before they hit the market. You do represent the buyer's interest. Definitely, you know, the buyer's agent is going to bring some industry knowledge. So let's talk a little bit about that industry knowledge, right? Let's talk about why a buyer would come to you versus, let's say, even a for sale by owner, right? What would you be able to provide a buyer in terms of information that if I just saw a for sale by owner sign in the yard and there was no other broker, in the transaction, what would you then, what should the buyer be looking to you for?
Awesome. Great question. So as a licensed real estate broker in the state of Illinois, we have to go through a ton of training, a ton of education, and then continuing education. I just looked at the date this year. I actually have to renew my license as a managing broker, but that's to ensure that we are always abreast to all of the changes that are constantly happening in our industry. Contracts are constantly being updated. We just had an update to the 7.0. Well, I don't know if you guys, I don't want to throw out jargon, but we just had an update to the contract that we use in our industry. And so a real estate professional, someone who's doing this every day, is going to be well-versed and extremely knowledgeable about what documentation is needed, what disclosures are needed, ensuring that an attorney is involved to protect your interests. As a buyer, you want to make sure that there are certain contingencies in place. You don't want to just submit an offer to the seller directly, shake it on a handshake, and now you bought a house. You haven't done a home inspection. You haven't had an attorney review the contract. There may be a ton of things wrong with that property that at the naked eye, you as the buyer may just not be well versed. And quite frankly, the agent either. Everyone has a role to play in the transaction. So once we've gotten you to that place, now we want to bring in all the other industry professionals to ensure that this is what we think it is. It looks like a great house. Let's make sure it's a great house. In addition to that, there's a certain code of ethics that we as real estate professionals are supposed to abide by. And I will say that the majority of our industry does. You get a couple bad apples, but we take our industry really seriously. One being the code of loyalty. Like, our job is to work for you and on your behalf. Duty of care, right? We want to make sure that we put your interests above ours, and we make sure that your offer is presented to the seller, and to make sure that the seller responds to us, and we negotiate on your behalf. We take a ton of classes, and negotiating expert classes, to ensure that we're negotiating on your behalf and just navigating the entire process. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of moving pieces. One of the other analogies that I use is planning a wedding. I know exactly what I want my wedding to look like, and I can just go ahead and plan it myself. Most people don't do that, though. Why? It's an extremely stressful time. You want to hire someone that has planned many weddings before. Why? They know what to look for. They know what hurdles that you may encounter. They know how to get you the best pricing. They know how to make sure you avoid paying, optimum pricing for different things. So certain things you just may not know to avoid, that a professional who's been doing this for a long time, or even not, it doesn't have to be 20 years, but someone who has the experience and the knowledge and who has vested in their craft to take the classes and ongoing classes, continue to learn their industry and update themselves on the changes. You want someone who's vested in the market, invested in the industry to represent you.
I love that. I love it, love it, love it. Thank you so much for that. And you jumped right into, just the topic of negotiation. And so as we were initially talking about just the listing agent who's representing the seller, and then you as the buyer's agent representing the buyer, you are basically providing that buyer with information based on the given market and the house that they've specifically chosen, so that they know the right price to offer. Am I correct in that?
That is correct. That is correct. We want to make sure that we present you with all of the information. A lot of times, getting a good deal in this business isn't always just getting the lowest price. Sometimes cheapest is not always best. Sometimes you're going to pay fair market value for that home, which could be the listing price. And quite frankly, it could even be higher. It just depends on the demand for that property, the location, the condition, and all of the variables surrounding the property. But having the right support and the right team helps you to make an informed decision. So that way, okay, I did make a good decision. I did have the home inspected. You know, there were only a few things wrong with it, but they weren't anything major. And I really still like the property. It looks like the homes that have sold in the area actually sold for the same price that this property is being listed for. So I see I am paying fair market value. I wish I could get a little bit lower, but you know, in order to get into this neighborhood, this is the price point that I have to pay. And we help you understand some of the nuances about buying a home. Everyone wants to buy the house for $50,000 less than list price. But the reality is that's just not always the case. And rarely in this market today in 2019 is that the case. And so we also can make sure that you're aware that market conditions have changed. And hey, if you want this property, here's the price you're going to have to pay for it.
And so are we in a buyer's market or a seller's market? And then can you tell us the distinction between the two?
So a seller's market and a buyer's market, whenever there's less than 6 months worth of inventory, that means that inventory is tight. That means that there's more buyers than there are homes to purchase. That's a seller's market. Whenever there are more than 6 months of inventory on the market, meaning there are an abundance of properties, more properties available than there are buyers to purchase, then that's a buyer's market. We are currently in a seller's market in the inner city of Chicago. Now, Chicago is interesting because it is certainly the tale of probably four cities. We have the inner city, we have south and west sides, which are similar. Then we have north, which is lower in inventory, I've learned. And then we have the suburban areas, north and south, which are unique in and of themselves as well. But Chicago as a whole overall has experienced a seller's market where there's been a lack of an abundance of inventory, more buyers than we've had properties to sell, and properties aren't sitting on the market for as long as they had been. Properties are probably sitting on the market for an average of about 65 days, maybe 90 in some areas, maybe shorter in some areas as well. But there was a point where they were sitting for much longer during the crash. So we've certainly recovered from that in the majority of the areas in Chicago. So I would say it's a seller's market.
And so when a buyer is out shopping for a new home and they see a property they've identified, that's the one, it's the one, right? I always like to share with buyers, when you go out with your agent, you should be ready to execute. Because just like it's the one for you, 9 times out of 10 in the market that we're in right now, it's also the one for someone else. So what would you say is the average list time for a property that is in move-in condition, that is priced right to sell, and where there's not necessarily a lot of other properties in that particular area like it, or that, there's a word that you all use on the broker side, and appraisers sometimes use it as well. I'm going to use the word equivalent.
Okay.
So I've got a property, it's priced right, it's in, great condition, and, and there are not many other properties equivalent to it within a 1 mile radius. How quickly is that property? Comparable. Thank you.
Comparable.
Look, I have my math language going right here with equivalent. So how long is that property stand on the market?
I would say probably about 35 days, a little over a month.
Okay.
Maybe about that 3 to 4 week mark.
Okay.
Yeah. Usually I read an article that said a property that's priced right would sell in about 3 weeks.
Okay. Perfect.
That gives it time to have exposure to the market. And I think it was worded differently. It might have said 6 showings.
Okay.
So depending on, like, Chicago, it's snowing right now, and we just had a polar vortex. Would you stop it? Stop it. So, it just depends on, so that 6 showings can take, it can take 6 days, it can take, 2 weeks, it just depends, but it's about 6 showings.
Perfect. And so we are going to move into, so here's just kind of a list of questions that I found that a buyer, could potentially ask their real estate broker. Are you fully licensed? I didn't know that you could not be fully licensed, but Are you fully licensed? Do you have access to silent sales or unlisted properties? Are you a member of a relevant real estate institute within your community? Do you have the current professional insurances that are necessary? Are you dedicated to buyers or do you sell as well? Do you specialize in certain geographic locations? Do you specialize in individuals that are either want to live in a property or buy investment property? And then can you provide, other team members or professionals that will assist me? So a home inspector, an attorney, a lender, insurance agent. So do you have other reputable professionals on your team that in the event that I needed a referral, would be able to, you'd be able to guide me there? Are there any other questions that you think are pertinent for a buyer when they are, initially, quote unquote, interviewing the real estate broker? Because I have it in my mind that buyers, this is typically one of the largest purchases most people make in their lifetime, right?
Right.
And interestingly enough, I have it that the way most home buyers, especially first-time home buyers, find their broker, which is nothing wrong with it, but the way that they typically find their broker is they see a sign, they call the number, and that's the broker for them.
Correct.
So again, that's not a bad approach, right? But it's the most optimal approach. And in the event that that is the situation that buyer finds themselves in, but they are not necessarily comfortable, or if they want to start the process the right way from the beginning, what are some other questions that a buyer should be asking of their, the person that's going to represent them in showing them, where their home and their family is going to be probably for at least the next 7 years?
So it's interesting. You mentioned how buyers typically come across an agent, and it's very haphazard, or it's referred to them by, their friend's broker or their cousin's aunt, somebody that they knew, right? And so typically 98% of buyers will work with the first real estate agent that they encounter. I don't say the challenge with that, but I guess what's concerning about that is the buyer's agent is so green to, the buyer is so green to the process that they don't know what questions to ask, right? And so these are great questions, but another question could be to really vet that agent to find out, what types of properties do they typically work with? What area do they normally work in? Now, my challenge with the question about the area is that as a licensee, we have all of this knowledge and information available to us. So you don't have to just work in the neighborhood where you live or where your office is located. But there is a tail sign that'll show if I've worked predominantly in a certain community or in a certain area, I'm probably very versed in that area. So if I'm looking to buy in a certain neighborhood and you're an agent that works in that neighborhood, it would be in my best interest to work with someone who knows the school district, who may have a relationship with the alderman, who may know where the churches are located, where's the grocery store, what are the convenient tools or places that I may want to go to shop, eat, or worship or play. But then also what's coming. If you know what's the 3, 5 year, 10-year plan in a community as a real estate professional, that may be a community where I want to work with the professionals that know other professionals in that area. Someone who's connected, who has resources, who may know things that I may not readily be able to find out on my own. So not to say that you need that, but that's super helpful. I think that's extremely helpful, finding out if that's the community where they work often, where do they work, and then the types of properties. If you know for sure that you want a condo, make sure, for example, if you know that you want a condo in a certain building, work with an agent that works that building. There's certain agents that work certain buildings, and that just speaks to their knowledge of that building. They'll know the ins and outs. They'll know the do's and don'ts. They'll know the things that I may have to call and inquire and wait and leave a message and call. They may already know. Work with that person, So just ask questions about, their level of experience in a particular neighborhood and with a particular property type, how long they've been doing it. That may help you too. From the standpoint of a negotiation. Maybe you have a difficult situation that you need someone who's kind of really experienced in real estate to get this done. A lot of times real estate is not that challenging, and you can work with an agent, because I don't want to disparage anyone who's newer to the business. Like, how do you learn other than by doing it, which is why we work in a team setting, so that way they can work under the tutelage and the experience of someone who has been doing it for 15 years, because everyone doesn't have that level of experience. But if they're working on a team and you see that they are working with someone who's been doing it for a while, that's also reassuring as well.
Absolutely. Very good. Very good. Thank you for sharing that communal aspect, because I do think that it is important that buyers kind of reshape and redefine who they're hiring on their team. Again, this is one of the largest purchases that most individuals and families make. And so it's really important to make sure that your team is representative or representing your interests. So, all right. So buyer be able. You said earlier that the fun part is the shiny object, going out and taking a look at, all the houses and going in and out and going through the bedroom, opening the new shiny refrigerator and all
exactly.
Of that. So I wanted to really just kind of point out that there are really 3 different places where it's been noted, that buyers have some difficulty. That more than half of buyers report that the most difficult task is simply finding the right home. And I believe that simply finding the right home is because you do not have the right partner or you don't have the right expectations. But the right partner can then begin to help you to shape what your expectations are based on, how much money you have in the bank to spend. In addition to the other factors, that are uncovered in that buyer consultation in terms of what you want. The second and third hardest tasks are the paperwork that are involved in, understanding the home buying process, which is actually why we went through, 7 weeks prior of, just really understanding the different phases of having your loan application be very solid. But then the last thing it says that the typical home buyer searched for 10 weeks and viewed 10 homes, which is 2 weeks shorter than in the last year. Would you find that 10 weeks, 10 homes to be pretty accurate in this market? Or what's the average amount? And here's my real question, right? My real question behind that is, so I've got buyer A on the phone and they call and, they're so frustrated because they just can't find the right house. And I say, okay, well, great. Did you guys go out this weekend? They say, yes, we went out this weekend. We went out last weekend. We went out the weekend before that. And come to find out, they have seen 30 homes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So they're confused in my mind, sitting over here behind the lending table. If I gave you 30 different mortgage products to choose from, which is not to say that we don't have 30 products available, but I'm not going to show you 30 products, right? So what would you say, how many homes is too many? Maybe is a good question.
Yeah.
And what's the average amount of homes that a person should really see before, if they're serious about buying, how many homes should a person typically see before they are ready to execute an offer?
So that question actually makes me very antsy. That number is going to vary. I'll be honest. That number will vary by buyer. But again, and this should probably be proprietary, and maybe I shouldn't share it, but I will, because I think other agents and buyers need to know that this is an expectation that should be set in our industry. Before I started doing the buyer consultation, okay, when I first, there's a reason why I do that. Okay. But before I started doing that, I didn't just start doing real estate and just know to do that. I just started showing houses. Hey, Sanina, I want to find, I got pre-approved. Yeah, let's go out, And so I'm just as excited as they are, right? And so we go out and see house number 1. Oh, no, I don't like carpet. Okay, mental check, they don't like carpet. House number 2. Oh, well, I really needed a second parking space. Okay, house number 3. Oh, they don't take pets. I have a dog. House number 4. And so now you start to realize that I've never had a conversation with you other than that you want 2 bedrooms and 2 baths. I don't know that you have a dog. I don't know that your kids go to school. in 30 minutes away from here and this is the wrong school district. I don't know that you have a friend that comes every weekend, so you need a second parking space. I don't know that you like to cook. I don't know that you'd like to take baths. I don't know that you need a lot of storage. Like, I don't know anything other than 2 bedrooms, 2 baths. So you know why they end up seeing 50 houses? And my battery on this is going to die. I think I'm not going to be able to hear you after a while. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
That's weird. Okay. But the reason why they need to end up seeing 50 homes is because we haven't gathered enough information to present them with the properties that meet the requirements that they need. So when you say if you have 30 programs, or 30 loan options, but no one needs to see that you have 30. There's 3 that meet what it is that you meet the qualification for, or there's 3 that'll probably be a good fit for you. You don't need to know about the jumbo loan if we can't afford a jumbo loan. We don't need to know about a rehab loan if we aren't going in that route. So there's a way to narrow it down. So what I try to do in that buyer consultation is get really concise and do a deep dive, and not just about the surface level, 2 bedroom, 2 bath, but about what that person values in a home. You know, we talk about their family. We talk about pets. Like, my client has a 40-pound dog. He's not getting rid of his dog because he's moving into a condo. So the condo needs to accept pets, and they need to accept 40-pound pets.
Yeah.
So any property that doesn't accept that, we can't even see it, no matter how beautiful it is, doesn't matter what the price is, because he's already shared with me he's not getting rid of his dog. And so I try to weed out the properties that aren't going to be a good fit for the reasons that you've already shared. Right. And so having that conversation helps to save you time, helps to save me time. So to answer your question, in terms of how long it normally takes, it normally takes me, and maybe this is just me, and I'm not saying I'm that good, but I think I am, but it normally takes me about 5 to 7 homes. Okay. Usually after home number 3, they know what they don't want for certain. Right. So I like the kitchen on that one, but the bedrooms are too small. So we know any home that has bedrooms 10 by 10, 10 by 9, 9 by 8, we'll need to see none of those little bitty homes, the little bitty bedrooms. We know we want something that's 12 by 12 or larger. So now I even educate my clients on, when you look at the MLS sheet, when I send it over to you, we know those rooms are going to be too small because those were the 10 by 10 ones. Remember that one home we saw with the little bitty rooms? That's what size they were. So let's look at the home sizes that are at least 12 by 12. And now they're weeding them out. Right? Process of elimination. Yeah, I know I sent you 12. That doesn't mean we have to see all 12, because guess what? Number 11 has this, number 12 has that, this one doesn't have a garage, that one doesn't have this. And so now we're weeding them out. They know if they wanted a certain look or feel to the kitchen. The pictures are going to be super helpful, right? And pictures can be deceiving, and you do need to go and actually see the property. But pictures can also save you some time, because if there's no island in the picture, there's probably no island in the kitchen. Right? They didn't take the island out, right? So we know if you wanted an island and that was your thing, well, this one doesn't have that. So was that a deal breaker for you? Because if it is, then we might not want to see that one. But if it isn't and you're flexible, then, you know. And so those are the types of conversations that I have with my client. And we talk about, you know, the clients that want rubies and diamonds coming out of the ceiling, you know, but they have they have a beer budget. And, you know, I crack jokes and I'll make sure that they understand. And I try to level set the expectation, because listen, I can only work as hard as you are realistic, right? And so if what you're looking for actually exists, I assure you I'll find it. That I can guarantee you, if it exists. If what you're looking for exists, I'll find it. But if you're asking me for rubies and diamonds, I can't produce that, because I don't know where that is, right? Every home, no matter brand new, built from the ground up, is going to have a ton of things wrong with it. Albeit, you know, sometimes they're small, but no home is perfect. And so we just talk about level setting those expectations, level setting the home inspection, you know, what to expect. And I think that helps to reduce the time that it takes to find property. I know I went off on a tangent with that one, but that was a sore spot for me for a long time.
I love that. That is really, really, really great. And so really what we're talking about here is what they want, you know, and what they need. What does the buyer need? And so a lot of times, you know, as we are tag teaming, right, because we're constantly in communication about the buyer as well. There are times when I'm having a conversation called, hey, you know, is that a want or is that a need? is it a must have? Like I must have two car garage, or it would be nice. It's just me and Omari. I have one vehicle, so two car garage would be nice, but it's not necessarily a must have. And what
Right.
I found is that, what you just said, after a person has seen one or two houses, they can pretty much clearly identify a must have versus a would be nice, right?
Right.
And then it's basically about, is that property available in the marketplace at the price point that you want, or that you're qualified for. And so planning your home tour. So you've kind of given us, through that buyer's consultation, you really share with us, what it is and how you're setting the expectation for the buyer in terms of educating them, not only in terms of styles of houses, because in Chicago, there are different styles of houses, probably around the country. But there are different styles of houses for sure. And so people want to begin, or the buyers want to begin to get familiar with that. But then also really beginning to narrow down, how many bedrooms, how many baths, basement, what are those must-haves? And all of those are things that you're covering in that buyer consultation, so that when they actually get out there and start shopping, all of that has pretty much been identified from the start. So we're going to go quickly through the next few slides as we are running out of time here. But I want to talk about the negotiation process and what you as the buyer's agent help that buyer to do in terms of negotiations. So they're pre-approved, you found the house, you write the contract. So buyer wants the house is listed for $200,000, you do a CMA, the CMA comes in at, $197,000. You are then talking to the buyer about potentially offering what number, and how do you go through that process of helping them to understand why you're offering the seller what you're offering, especially in our market where it's pretty consistent that the buyer wants the seller to help them with closing costs. And so a lot of times the buyer, when they talk to me, they think that they offered $197,000 and the seller's giving them $3,000 towards closing costs. And so now the house is really going to cost $194,000, which doesn't really work exactly that way. So tell me a little bit about the negotiation process. Do you talk to that buyer on the front end about how the negotiations work, or do you wait until you have an actual property that they are ready to make that offer on?
So again, during that consultation, we talk about the entire process. It really depends on how much time we have during that time, but I try to go over that up front as it pertains to how we negotiate, right? Because when it's time to submit an offer, a lot of times at that point, it's time to move quickly, and time is of the essence. So we may not have a lot of time to go back and forth. The most opportune time to talk about our strategy and to negotiate is when we still have the leverage to do so. And so if a property is $200,000 and we run the comps and the comps come back and they're a little bit short or shy of the $200,000 that the seller is asking for, and we couple that with the fact that the buyer usually also needs down payment assistance of some sort or a closing cost credit, which I also explain to the buyers that the more we ask for from the seller, the more we weaken our position, right? And we're lessening our offer. So if we're already saying, you know what, I'm not giving you 200, I'll give you 195 because that's what my CMA says. And I need you to give me 3% closing costs. And for the sake of round numbers, I'll just say $3,000 closing costs. We've just reduced that offer now to 192, right? And so I position that to the buyer and say, hey, are you sure you want to offer 192? The comps are saying that the home value should be at X if the home value is higher than the price point where we're offering and there's a demand. Right. So we also look at how long has the property been on the market? Okay. Did the property just sit on the market? Has it been on the market for less than 7 days? Is it brand new? Is it in good condition? Do you think other people would also want this property? Or has it been on the market for 197 days? You probably got a lot more room. If it was going to sell, it probably would have sold by now. So if it's been on the market for longer, that also puts us in a position where we can ask for more now, because now we have more leverage. Hey, Mr. Seller, look, I want to buy your house and I know you want to sell it and it's been on the market for 4 months, and I'm sure you're ready to get rid of it. So why don't you take this $10,000 less than list price? And now you have a lot more negotiating room as opposed to the one that just hit the market 7 days ago. The seller is less apt to take less than list price, especially if within 7 days you already are in a position to submit an offer, because you usually are in at least one other person. I'm not sure why the law of numbers works like that, but it works like that. Like there's usually one other guy that's like, you don't want it, I do. And so, positioning the offer to be accepted is what I try to do. So if we need to ask for closing costs, how do we position the initial offer where it offsets that reduction or that concession that we're now making as a result of asking for that 3% of that $3,000? But I also want to position my buyer where we're going to ask for it all, and we'll let them chop it down and work backwards and tell us what they're not going to do. So we want the home warranty. We want the closing cost credit. We certainly want to do a home inspection. And during that time, I like to go over with the buyer what that looks like to ensure that we want the seller to make certain repairs, and then there may be certain credits that are requested there as well. And so we just want to look at the numbers and determine if what we're asking for is fair and reasonable, or if we're asking for the seller to put us in a better position than we were in originally. And does that make sense? Like, would you do that as the seller? Like, the seller is trying to get rid of the property. They're not trying to improve it, and they're certainly not trying to have you walk away with, tens of thousands of dollars in your pocket. However, we have to do a give and take. So I try to do what I consider a win-win type of negotiation where, okay, here's what we want. And then I even talk about the counter. Here's what the seller's probably going to say. Okay. And so here's what are you willing to give back? Right. So here's what you really want. Here's what we're going to ask for. But here's what you really want. So there's a gap from where we're headed, where we are and where we're headed, which is the concession that the buyer has to be willing to make. That gap represents what we're going to give back.
Perfect. Final walkthrough. I believe this is our last quick slide here. And so you talked about the home inspection. So typically the home inspection is there to kind of help, and we're going to have a home inspector on it in the next couple of weeks, but it's really to identify those things, as you said earlier, that you can't see with your eyes. So even on the newly rehabbed properties where everything looks, brand new, sometimes we find that once the home inspection is done, that there are things that are uncovered that may need addressing. And so the importance of the final walkthrough is primarily for what reason?
Well, it's extremely important if the seller has things that they agree to fix, right? And so that gives us so typically with the final walkthrough, we go through with the checklist, and now we can verify that the seller has fixed the items that they agreed to fix, A, and then B, to make sure that the property's in the same condition that it was in when you found it, right? Especially in a winter like this is a prime example. Pipes may burst, water may leak. Intentional or unintentional has not occurred in the property since the last time I've seen it. The biggest thing I've found is ensuring that the seller has made the repairs. I've had a number of incidents where that did not occur. Either it wasn't caught at the final walkthrough, or walkthrough didn't happen for whatever reason, and there's no recourse for the buyer for that. And so that's a terrible place to be in for the agent and the buyer, because I feel for them. But that is avoidable by making sure that final walkthrough occurs, to ensure that if there are any reasons why this closing should not happen tomorrow, kind of like, is there anyone who can stand up and attest to why these buyers shouldn't get married, why these two shouldn't get married? Like, that's when you would raise your hand, like the final walkthrough, you're like, hey, pick me, where'd that hole come from? That's where that would all take place.
So basically, the home that you made the offer on, you're making sure it's in the same condition when you get ready to move in as it was
exactly
30 to 45 days ago when you first saw it, and
exactly.
or any improvements that have been made have definitely been made. And so ultimately, your buyer's agent is there, as you're walking through this challenge and you're trying to navigate the process. Your agent is really there to make sure that there are 2 wins, not just one. We want both sides. We want all parties to walk away. The new family that has their home and the family that needed to make the transition. We want all parties to definitely have a win-win. And so that concludes our portion today with the fabulous Sanina Ellison-Jones of Chicago Homes Realty Group. And all of her contact information is here. Please reach out to her. If you are looking to purchase your new home, what I can say about Miss Sanina is that she is thorough, she is detailed, and she has a heart that really, really ensures that her buyers are well taken care of. And so sellers as well. That's not just for the buyers, but because we're focusing on the home buying process, I definitely wanted to make sure that we covered those things that are important for buyers to know. So thank you so much for joining us on today.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Yes, it's really been a ton of fun, and you've been a wealth of information as usual. So that ends our class for today. Next week, I will do a little video and tell you guys later what week 9 is about. But we only have 3 more weeks left in the challenge, and I'm super excited. Pre-approvals are coming out, and you guys are working your tails off, so keep up the great work. Until next time, we'll see you later. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.